crusades with prayers is because a crusade is unlike other evangelistic meeting. A crusade is not a normal Saturday. A crusade is not just another prayer meeting. Mais là où gon croisade, gon bagay qui passe qui ont ti gens différent parce que croisade là pas même j'ai avec un programme samedi matin parce que là où font croisade c'est la caille ennemi en même ou rentrer pour être te ka délivrer des trois monde. So ça mande pour nous tous s'il vous plaît si nous te ka faire ça pour monde t'a apprécier l'empile. S'il t'est possible, est-ce que nous dans 2 semaines ça nous était nos positions dépouillées. Est-ce que ça OK avec tout le monde? There we go. As we get everything situated, we're going to go into our text that we're going to be meditating in. Today's text is not complicated. It's not long. It's rather simple. It's rather simple. It is a text that everybody should know. It is a text that everybody should believe. It is a text that everybody should understand. Rather, it is Genesis 1, verse 1. Semblait pas aucun monde qui content de Genèse premier verset pour nous mes amis. I want you to know that you cannot start an evangelistic meeting without answering the fundamental questions of life, which all of which could be found in Genesis 1 verse 1. L'église nous bon, nous disons bon Dieu merci, nous disons bon Dieu merci. So for the theme for this week is in pursuit of his glory. In pursuit of his glory, church. Today we're going to do it a little bit different. We're going to say this creed or this covenant tonight for all of my English speakers so we know the objectives for these couple of weeks. So we know the ideas for these couple of weeks. For tonight, we're going to start with the first line. It says, tonight, I will begin my journey towards the eternal. I will make the wellness of my soul my chief priority. I will not push off until tomorrow the decisions that should be made today. So I refuse to waste my time with haters, my times on the simple, my wisdom on the fools, and I will not make another investment on people who means my soul no good. I am done tasting Jesus. I am done teasing Jesus. I am done testing Jesus. From this point in, I am. Mes amis, pas nous qui t'aime li, peut-être moi mes amis. The last part. From this point in, I am in the pursuit of. There we go. This is going to be our covenant for the next couple of days. It is just something to get your mind in the spirit. Now, I want you to understand, as we're doing the covenant, there is one thing that has been popping up for a while, and that is the biggest questions that a lot of people face. As you grow in the faith, as you are born in the faith, as you get structure in the faith, there's certain questions that have emerged, and I want you to understand this. Recently, there's been a growth in the lack of belief of God. I know as a church, I know as a community, on connaît entendu qu'il y a une communauté, entendu qu'il y a l'église. Normalement, nous tout pour nous dire we have a certain belief in God. But the question that I get most of the time in our generation, the question that I've seen that's popped up concerningly, the questions that I've seen that's popped up consistently is, Pastor, does God exist? Now, as people of God, this question seems to baffle some of us, because I want you to understand, when a young person sees all the devastation that is happening in the world, when a young person sees all the craziness that is happening in the world, the question must be asked, est-ce que bon Dieu existe-vous? And I wonder what's been causing this, but after a while I realized, church, there is a sudden growth of disbelief in God that has came up. And the biggest reason, as I've done my research, the biggest reason, is this reason of you don't believe what you don't see. Okay, nous pas comprendre. In other words, the idea is because we don't see God, we don't believe in God, which seems like it makes sense. But I want you to know that the same way how you don't see gravity, gravity is still present holding you down, right? Okay, y'all didn't get it. M'ta remen pour connaître, là ou manger ou manger. L'on point premier, deuxième, troisième qui a au power de nutrition, en dans manger qui a rentré en don puis a nourri. Mais est-ce que nutrition n'a pas toujours existé dans manger? Okay. Is it just me, or when the wind blows, you can see the motion of the breeze, but you can't see the wind itself? But does that mean that the wind does not exist for that reason? Okay, but I want to bring up this statement. I want you to understand that God kind of works in the same manner. Although you can't see him, God kind of like gravity. You can't see him, but you can feel him holding you down in the crisis moments. God is kind of like nutrition, because although you can't see him, you still know that he's giving you everything you need to function. God is kind of like the wind. Somehow he passed by. See, the same way how you can't see gravity, you can't see nutrition, you can't see the wind, does not exempt them from existing. Okay, see, y'all don't get this. See, what I've found out is there is 4 groups of people, church. These 4 groups of people are classified in this manner. See, as we grow in maturity, we go through these 4 categories. There is the atheists, the people who don't believe in there is a God. It's not that they don't believe in our God. In other words, they don't believe in any God. Stick with me. The next one, you have the agnostic or the skeptics. The skeptics would be what you would describe as somebody who believes, but then they don't really believe. Okay, y'all don't get it. You know when somebody says something and you're like, I'm skeptical? That's what that means. It doesn't mean that you believe them, but you kind of do, but you kind of don't. They're kind of in the middle ground. And then you have the theists. And the theists, you have 2 categories. The theists believe in gods, but by theists, ou gen des categories, ou gen yon ki kwe nan plusieurs dieux, which is known as polytheists. And then you have the one that starts with the D, who believes in the one God, Jehovah, which is deist. Now, I want you to understand the reason why this is important, because ou remarquez dans première liste nan raison qui fait faire comme ça, parce que dans génération n'a vivre là, one of the things that grows the fastest is not the deists or the polytheists, because nobody believes in Zeus or Hermes anymore. But ça qui a grandi en pile, c'est les ou ça qui a grandi en pile, c'est moun qui relè non yo as atheists. En génération à moun qui pas croire dans l'éternel. Même temps remet pour mouto aujourd'hui que malgré nous dissect the belief of God, not based on the Bible, but based on what an atheist believes, God still exists in the logic of an atheist. Okay, y'all not getting it. So let me break it down. Okay, let's do it this way. So there's 3 groups of atheists. Premier group of atheists, nous te parlé de li, c'est moun qui pa wè, et à cause yo pa wè, yo di pa exister. Mais gen pile bagay ou pa wè qui toujours existait, qui toujours fonctionnait, même avec Jean nous te parlé. The second group of atheists are a group of people who basically argue, à cause gen pile bagay qui passe dans monde là qui négatif, then that means that God does not exist. Oh, y'all not getting it. Because there's a lot of negativities that's been happening. Because there's wildfires. Because there's storms. Because there's earthquakes. Because there's all these craziness. It seems like God does not exist. But I want you to understand that all these things happened. It's not that God doesn't exist. It's simply people stop coming to God. Okay, y'all not getting it. So let me illustrate it this way. When he gets to the barber shop, he hears this big argument as a pastor, and they're telling him that God does not exist. And they start having this argument that God doesn't exist because if he exists, then there would not be any murders. If he exists, then he should shelter the children from the craziness. If he exists, then people should not be so negative and evil. And let me see vin tande toute discussion, les messieurs vin tande toute raison qui fait Jésus, bon Dieu pas exister, ça le décide puis le fait, l'el fin ta échevel. He goes outside and he finds a homeless man with crazy hair, crazy beard, and he has hair all over. What he does is he grabs this homeless man and he brings him to the barber shop. Et pendant l'arrivée avec monsieur ça qui a en pile cheveux, en pile bagaille, il vient devant moun na qui t'a taillé cheveux. Il dit, is there a barber in the house? Everybody said yes, of course. But once he said, is there a barber in the house? He says, if there's a barber, why is it that this man's hair is crazy? See, if there's a barber under that same penalty, because there's a barber that exists, that means that there should not be anybody with crazy hair. And once he said that, the barber said, no, it's not that we don't exist. It's simply he didn't come to us. Okay, y'all not getting it. In other words, yon nan problème nou gen, et pas parce que l'Éternel pas existé, mais ça me vin remarquer qui fait un pile bagay à passer dans le monde là, c'est dès que moun pas vin joindre l'Éternel encore. And when you don't come to God the same way, you find people who do cruel stuff because they do not have the fear of God in them. Okay, let's do it this way because I see some of you guys are still struggling with it. The argument that is posed is that the proof of evil is evident that God does not exist. Stick with me here, which means that chaque bagay mal passé, il moutoue que l'Éternel pas existé. Mais ça m'ta remet pour me faire connaître, si vous utilisez même logique ça sous dos Satan, même logique Satan, even the same logic of the enemy, you realize it basically contradicts what the enemy is saying. Because if every day something bad happens, if every day something evil happens, it proves that God doesn't exist. That means every day nothing bad happens, nothing evil happens. It shows that we have a living Savior. Oh, y'all not getting it. Ça veut dire chaque jour un bagay mal passé. Il suppose moutou que l'Éternel pas existé. Mais on a remarqué dans la vie où il y a plus de jours qui passaient bien d'un jour qui passait mal. Ça veut dire chaque jour levé il moutou que l'Éternel vivant. Chaque jour fonctionner il moutou que l'Éternel vivant. Every day you get up and go to school shows that the Lord is alive. Every day you come home without an accident shows that God is functioning. Every day your kids don't get kidnapped shows that God is still awake. Every day your house doesn't burn down shows that God still protects her. Chaque jour lève au manger, chaque jour lève au fonctionner, chaque jour lève au marcher, chaque jour lève au parler. Every day that you function is evidence that we serve a living God. See, that's the issue. But I want you to understand, although when we bring this up, that means that you're using the Bible to defeat it. What I want you to understand is it's not necessarily the Bible that proves that God exists, but rather science itself proves that God exists. Oh, y'all not getting it. See, a lot of times, là nous parler de science, nous toujours penser science c'est un bagay qui là puis disprouve ou bien puis décrédite l'Éternel. Même temps mais pour faire connaître the intelligence of science was given to us by God because the Bible lets you know fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And science is the breakdown of wisdom. So what we're going to do this morning before we touch our text, before we touch our scripture, we're going to start proving God in some scientific ways. Can we do that, church? Can we do that, church? There we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to prove God, the existence of God in these three ways. We're going to prove it first cosmological. We're going to then prove it biological, and then we're going to prove it with anthropological. There we go. So I want you to understand that there's a lot of other things that we can use to prove God. But for the purpose of time, we're just going to use those three things. So you have the first one, cosmological, which is the study of the cosmos. You have anthropological, which is the study of the human history. And you have biological. Everybody knows what biological is, right? Biological, the study of living organism. Okay, now I want you to understand this. The word cosmos literally means order of the world. The word cosmos is from the Greek explanation or the Greek language, which after the Greek examined everything in the universe. Après société grecque là, vient examiner tout ça qui a passé dans le monde là, yo utilisé mot cosmos ça pour yo ka expliquer l'ordre qui passait inside the world order. Now I want you to understand the cosmos alone explains a couple of things, because realistically I know qu'il y a un peu de monde qui pensait que scientists believe that it's the Big Bang theory that happened, say it's the evolutionary theory that occurred, but I want you to understand scientists have recently concluded that there are certain things that the Big Bang theory can't explain. But what they've concluded is in this law of cosmos, in the idea of cosmos, after they examined everything that is happening, Léo examiné tout ça qui a passé dans tout l'univers, they come up with this thing called the law of order. Oh, y'all don't get it. Y'all don't get it. See, a law of order basically says this. The law of order states that order can't come out of chaos. Okay, y'all don't get it. So in other words, le gon bagay ki gen l'ordre, fel gen on moun pou ki mette l'ordre nan bagay lan ki gen des autres lan. In other words, si on vent ou bien on cyclone ou bien tempête, if there is a hurricane or a tornado, it tombe non pal fatra or a junkyard. It falls inside a junkyard, spins everything around. Out of that junkyard, a Lamborghini won't come out of it, because it doesn't make sense. The doors aren't just going to connect to each other. Pot machine n'a pas ka connecter à yon à l'autre, et na tout piyon pour machine sorti malgré son pal fatralier, il difficile, il impossible. In other words, sous une machine créée, ou connaît son monde qui gen l'ordre qui vini, il mesure machine dans tout sens. Et pendant le mesure machine nan vin rive non point qui a fonctionné. Est-ce que tout le monde comprend? Which means that the order cannot come out of chaos. But what I like about this is notice what the Bible says, because les scientists calculent ça, ou pas qu'à dire c'est l'Éternel qui fait. But what they say is that there's a higher authority that came down and started demonstrated the world. Why? Because the world is set up in such format. Le monde set up non façon qui est tellement drôle que it has to have some kind of intelligence to it. But this is what I'm gonna say to you today. When you go to Hebrews 3 verse 4, it says, for every house has a builder. Oh, y'all not getting it. But God is the builder of everything. Ok, nous pas comprendre l'église, nous pas comprendre. Bon, moi, c'est une décade expliquer comme ça. Nous agissons l'église dans belle l'église. Est-ce que tout le monde est d'accord l'église dans belle? Mes amis, nous pas besoin pour nous perdre ça. Fait moun connaît nous gon belle l'église. Ou après marquer là où regarder l'église là. Pas gen aucun monde qui vient dans l'église là qui dit magically, sans pas aucun monde qui mette aucun effort, il fait l'église dans belle comme ça. Pas aucun monde qui dans bon sens qui a dit là l'église dans t'a formé son espace vide et comme ça gagne un ciment avec un de l'eau qui mêlé sans aucun monde moyen et ciment couché à terre et l'aile couché à terre commencer puis il prend brique ou bien bricks puis ouais s'il est fin faire mien, and as it's doing the walls, then somehow electrical currents start running through the wires and going through the roof in the same way how somehow tiles came and placed on the roof. You see how crazy that sounds? The same way how then the lights and the electricity comes, which is the same way how after the lights and the electricity comes, magically saying this pulpit was just forming right there. You realize, you can't say magically those pillars were created. You can't say magically they came together and connected. You can't say magically the roof was assembled. You can't say magically the pubes were installed. Si ban yo besoin moun pou ki mette yo, si roof lan besoin moun pou ki fè connexion, si yon moun besoin pou fè électricité an pou gen courant, this means that chaque bagay wè ki gen l'autre gen moun ki kreye. Et ça, Hebrews 3 verse 4 for connaît, it lets you know for every house has a builder, but God builds everything. So, si ou pa vinan dans l'église, non pas imaginer l'église nan existe pas tête li. Why is it that you look at the universe and you automatically assume that the universe exists by itself? Oh, y'all not getting it, church. You realize how much more significant and mighty the universe is to a house? Okay, let's put it this way. You realize, malgré l'église lan belle, c'est vrai, mais belle lumière ça nous gagne. M'a imaginer après 10, 15 ans encore n'a besoin pour nous changer lumière. Même the roof that you guys have, although it looks good now, 50 years from now that roof needs to be changed. Mais on après marquer l'éternel bon lumière qui passait 1000 ans, 2000 ans, 3000 ans, pas jamais besoin de changer. You realize that the sky's been up there for centuries and it never needed to be changed. So how is it you can argue that the church needs a builder, but something as mighty as that you can't say nothing? Okay, y'all not getting it. But I want you to understand what makes it interesting. Because the Bible goes even further, church. Because in Job said it this way. When Job finished going through his trials and tribulation, then God comes up to Job, and Job is ready for God. Job prépare une liste question pour l'Éternel. Il dit, l'aime moi l'Éternel, m'a cassé mette la main, m'a pas demandé l'Éternel pour qu'il s'al quitte me passer misère ça. He's going to ask God, why do I have to go through it? He's going to ask God, why did it have to be me? And God started asking Job some questions. He said, where were you when I built the earth and the foundation? Where were you, Job? And it says, who marked the dimensions? Surely you know who. Notice what the next verse says. The Bible says, God says he took a tape measure. Oh, back on point, back. All right, let's break that part down. I'm going to enjoy this part by myself. Ou remarquez, par loi science, by astrology and astronomy, ou remarquez, il y a un bagay qui passe droit l'église. Parce que là, on examine chaque autre planète, vous remarquez c'est seul monde là qui a de l'eau dans forme de l'eau qui gagne. Which means if you go to the first two planets, church, you realize that they don't really have water. They kind of just have melted metal, which means they have mercury, they have iron. It's just kind of hot. When you go to the back ones, you realize ou pa gen d'eau seulement gon type de glace. Oh, y'all not getting it. When you go to Saturn and Neptune and Jupiter, you realize there's not really water. There's just simply ice. See, what many people concluded is that the way the earth is positioned, the way the earth is made, God placed it in a format that's so beautiful that if it was 2 centimeters forward, just 2 centimeters, not 2 inches, si te move 10 centimeters, pipwe soleil lan, a force tap chaud, tout bagay tap brûlé. At the same time, if you were to be moved 2 centimeters back, it would be so freezing that you wouldn't even be able to function. But yet somehow it is placed in such a beautiful location that somehow the cold doesn't freeze you. Somehow the heat doesn't burn you. Somehow you have water to drink. Somehow he covers you still. And somehow it's made it. But I want you to understand the scientists can't understand this. Because the scientists are telling me that basically it was a big explosion that caused this. C'est un bagay qui éclatait qui créait ça. Mais après ma question nous te parlé dans commencement, the law of chaos and order basically dictates if an explosion happens this way, it is impossible to get the type of order we have now. But what I like to tell you today is Job 38 verse 4 through 5 tells me that what God did, God take a tape measure and God ran it across the earth, which means il calculait qui côté soleil là pour aller. Elle remarquait qui ça soleil là pour le faire. And what he does is he takes the earth and he's like, there's no way the earth is going to survive here in 2 inches. So I need to scoot him back in 2.5 inches. Oh, y'all not getting it, church. Which means, church, le bon Dieu t'a fait ça, le point le calculer. Il mesurait toute bagaille. And not only did he measure the distance, but God saw that he couldn't just let the earth face the sun this way. Because if he faced it this way, Chalet Soleil is going to literally melt the two poles, the north and the south. So what God decides to do is God says, I'm going to lean it a little bit. And after I lean it a little bit, I'm going to churn it. And as it's churning, the sun is going to be able to cover all parts without the complication of them freezing. So ou gen soleil assez pour fonctionner. Et soleil n'a pas boucané. Ou gen un bon petit fouet qui passait pour fonctionner. Et fouet pas crasé. In other words, God took the time to build the structure and ran a tape measure on the earth so that we can be where we need to be, church. And the gospel for somebody today is si bon Dieu te ka pointant ça, puis take a tape measure, puis courir sous monde là, puis assurer que tout bagay côté au terrain. What will God do for you when he puts some order in your life? God can take that same tape measure and run it through your life. So he puts you in a position where the haters can't get to you, where your enemies can't get to you, but you're close enough to your friends for some support because God has a way of measuring some things to get it to where he needs it to be. But Job goes a little bit better, because si vous continuez l'histoire Job dans Job 38, God gets to the point where he commence à il dit, what about the ocean? L'église, je connais bon Dieu existait parce que les mal gardés dans la mer. Et I'm back on Sue Jean Passe parce que, you know, we live in Miami, we live in Fort Lauderdale, we're close to the beach. The beach is like literally 10 minutes. Là où passe devant la mer, I swear, you'll see the waves get so close to the ocean. And it looks like the waves are going to take over what God told them to take over. But you realize in Job 38 verse 11, God says, I put a barrier. God says, I put a barrier between the wave so that when the wave gets too high, I can pull him back and he can get back to where he needs to be, church. Raison qui fait me connaître ça, parce que si bon Dieu dit qu'on ça pas jamais quitter l'âme la mer, vinn pi ou passer terre, puis pas couvrir terre. Ça veut dire qu'on point même la mer qui la mer gen puis respecter, bon Dieu a dit il a passé. Et si bon Dieu a dit ça pour la mer, imaginez là on a un problème avec tribulation. Ça veut dire bon Dieu gon point de tribulation à privé. Il a campé et a dit c'est assez. You can only go this far, but I'm not going to let you overtake them, because when the enemy comes like a flood, God raised a standard so that way we can stand. The Bible lets you know that while scientists are trying to conclude, la science a essayé expliquer Jean monde nan formé, Jean informé. Bon Dieu déjà expliqué tout Jean formé. Il expliqué c'est lui-même qui fait. Il expliqué aux gens mesurer pour assurer que tout bagay travaille. He explains to you in all factors, which means cosmological wise, it shows you that God already exists. But I told you we're going to go through a couple of sciences, because the next one is anthropological or anthropology. Anthropology simply means the study of mankind. L'église, raison qui fait ça fait me content, parce que l'aime étudier the study of mankind. Anthropology, c'est là où étudier histoire qui t'est passée, or when you study the past histories of past civilization. See, when you study the past history of past civilization, what you'll find is that all civilizations have one thing in common. Toute société qui passée, from the beginning all the way to now, again, yon bagay tout fait. All of them has a tendency of liking to create structures, of liking to create policies and procedures, so we know how to function as a whole. Okay, you're not getting it. In other words, toute société remet l'ordre. Mais wap remarquer, based on the law of evolution, wap remarquer if it just happened with an explosion, because there's no divine or intellectual being behind it, what that would say is it simply just happened. But you realize that can't be the case. Because if it just happened, we should just happen to do a lot of things. For example, you shouldn't really have to plan to go to work. It should just happen. You shouldn't really have to plan to go to school. Hold up. I'm not saying don't go to school. You shouldn't have to plan to go to school. It should just happen. You shouldn't have to plan for you to build a house. Your house should just happen through the process of osmosis, which means based on just happening theory, it means that everything should just happen because it's a circumstance that we're in the right situation and it occurred. But the reason that I know that we are built by an intellectual being is because you realize everything we do has order and sequence. You realize when you go to work, and there's a hierarchy at work. You realize when you go to school, there's a structure in your school and there's a hierarchy in your school. You realize when you drive in the street, there's a structure in the streets and there is a hierarchy in the streets. Even when you come to church, there's a structure in the church and there's a structure and a hierarchy in the church, which means that everything we do, we have to pre-plan and put order in it. And I want you to understand the reason why we can conclude that we are created by an intelligent being is because it gave us the ability to think intellectually. That's why you have the famous philosopher that says, "I think, therefore I am." But I want you to understand the issue with this, because at the end of the day, as we're studying this, it shows you two components. Not only anthropological wise, we are able to function in a higher plane and pre-plan. Mais il y a un autre bagay qui passe qui drôle pour moi en pile. Parce que là où étudier the past civilization, ou étudier moun yo qui t'est passé avant, because you know Solomon says there's nothing new under the sun. I want you to understand something interesting happens, church. And what interesting that happened is you realize that with everything that occurred, church, with tout bagay qui passe, you realize that God is so good to us. Not only did he create us, but you realize God has never recycled DNA. Okay, y'all gonna act brand new. You realize, church, with all the people who's passed, avec tout l'autre monde qui passe dans l'histoire monde là, God could have recycled somebody's DNA one time. He could have gave you somebody's fingerprint and you would have never known. He could have gave you somebody from 2,000 years ago, a hair color, and you would have never known. But you realize that God is so particular que si on l'état with fingerprint power, they can differentiate the fingerprint pour à vous-même, a fingerprint à l'autre monde qui existait. Which means God is so good that even your fingerprint does not look like everybody else's fingerprint, which means when he made you, he was intellectually tuned enough to make sure that you would be different and to make sure that you would be unique. That's why in Jeremiah, the Bible lets you know he knows the plan he has for you, but it also says before you were even born, which means avant tes fêtes, bon Dieu t'a déjà imaginé où je vais faire. Et là, imaginez ça, he creates your own fingerprint and put it aside. He created your own hair texture and put it aside. He gave you your own eye formation and put it aside. He gave you your own mindset and put it aside. Et là où pour faire, l'Éternel mêlé et créé et voyelle, et là le voyelle qu'on y a vu exister. So the reason why I know God lives, church, the reason why I know there's a God is because you realize if it was just by accident, out of the billions of people that exist, somebody would have somebody's fingerprint. But yet each and every one of us somehow are so unique and in tune because God in his grace and mercy took the time to make each and every one of us different. Because God was intentional with your creation. Et l'église, sometimes pour me faire nous connaître, raison qui fait ça important pour connaître. Because if God is intentional with your creation, God is intentional with your objective. If God is intentional with what you were or what you would be made of, God is intentional with what you'll become, okay? If God is intentional about what you were, God will be intentional of what you will be, okay? Y'all not getting it. In other words, if God took the time to give you your fingerprint, I'm pretty sure he took the time to write out your dreams. If God took the time to give you your hair color, I'm pretty sure he took some time to listen while you prayed. If God took the time to give you your body formation, I'm pretty sure when you cried out, he heard your voice specifically. Why? Because he gave you a specific voice with a specific pitch, with a specific volume. So l'oreille l'Éternel connaît exactement qui voit parce que c'est lui qui te bon voix dans commencement. So the reason why I know God exists is because of our unique individuality. But I also want you to understand this, that the reason that God is so perfect in his design and in his ability is because God created us to be a thinking creature. That's why you notice that it has to be from a thinking being, because if we're thinking creatures, we can't be more knowledgeful than the person who created us. Okay, y'all not getting it. So in other words, although a computer is very advanced, a computer can't be smarter than the person who created the computer. So the fact that you have the intellect, the fact that you have the intellect, the fact that you have the cognitive ability, the fact that you can remember things, the fact that you could play scenarios in your mind kind of like a TV plays it, the fact that you could have the ability to build relationship simply means that you have a God who not only remembers things, which means he remembers you, but it also means that he has the ability to play things back, which means once you are worshiping him, he has the ability to play back your goodness and remember all the positivities that you've done while simultaneously selecting to forgive and forget your sins. That's why God says, let us make man in our image. Because I hope you understand that God didn't just make you out of weirdness. God didn't just spontaneously try to come up with the idea. Mais bon Dieu pour un temps puis créer un monde dans image li. C'est pour ça vous-même ou pensez différent parce l'autre bête. That's why you have cognitive abilities. A lion does not have cognitive abilities. A lion has instincts. You have the ability to think, to dream, to imagine. All those were created. Why? Because your creator is a cognitive being. And when he created you, he didn't just create you as a thought. He created you in his image. But I want you to understand, it's not just anthropology, but biologically speaking. Church, biologically speaking, it's kind of unique. Because the biology is the study of everything. In short, in biology, you have anatomy, you have physiology, you have everything in biology because it's the study of the biomes. Now, I want you to understand why biology, pour que ça biology moutoué que l'Éternel vivant. I'm just going to touch this and then we're going to get to moving. I want you to know, church, that there is a law in quantum mechanics, which is the law of no cloning theorem and the law of no deleting theorem, which basically is similar to the law of thermodynamics. You guys probably heard this before. It says energy cannot be created or destroyed. Well, the same way how it is. Information cannot be destroyed or created. It can simply be transferred or transformed. Okay, y'all not getting it. Let's see if we can do this. Chef là, est-ce que je peux pour 2 secondes? En question, m'gien. What it means is information ou pas qu'à jeter information, ou qu'à accepter pour apprendre information. So, bon demande une question, chef là. Qui est-ce qui mouto mathématique? It's not a trick question. It's not a trick question, I promise you.
Mathématiques, l'école, c'est l'école.
Lò à l'école. So, qu'a dit professeur?
Professeur mathématique.
Ou un professeur mathématique.
Professeur français, un professeur pour chaque branche.
Exactement. Qui est-ce qui monte professeur en mathématiques?
Professeur à l'école, et puis à l'école normale, ou bien à l'université, là, l'étudier mathématiques, parce que les mathématiques sont sciences liées.
Exactement. Well said. Good job. Qui est-ce qui monte moun qui monte professeur à sciences mathématiques là?
Eh bien, c'est professeur.
Exactement. Merci, chef. Merci en pile. Ça veut dire, on va reconnaître l'église. Là, pour montrer mon information, fait le moun qui montre l'autre mon information. Which means that information cannot be created. Even the information that people are saying they've found or they have named after him, it was not creative, it was discovered. Now, this is important because si information pas créer, it means that the information must be passed down from somewhere. Okay, y'all not getting it. Which means, même Jean, merci oui en pile chef là. Which means, même Jean, LDA sot fait nous connaît, fait le gon moun qui mouton l'autre moun jusqu'à ce que tout le monde comprenne. Est-ce que tout le monde comprend? Mais on va remarquer, your DNA is only information. Think about that for a minute. Which means the law of quantum mechanics says that information can't be destroyed or created. It can simply be transferred or transformed. But you realize that your DNA is nothing but information. Which means, where did that information from your DNA come from, church? There we go. From the creator. There has to be a source where that information came from so that that source can give it to somebody else. S'il pas j'aime gon professeur qui connaît mathématiques, il est difficile pour l'autre monde vin imagine mathématiques because somebody has to teach somebody something. But your DNA is straight information, which means in order for that information to get there, for you to have your hair color, for you to have your eye color, for you to have your temperament, for you to have all these things, it had to come from somewhere. And I hear the Bible that says that in the beginning, God created. Oh, y'all don't get it. Okay, let's backtrack for a minute. The pastor has a problem with the evolution theory because I haven't touched the evolution theory yet. I'm just touching the basic science that proved the existence of an all-powerful God, a God that everybody knows and should worship. I want you to understand, seul problème gain avec evolutionary theory is evolutionary theory does not answer 3 questions. And you can ask this to anybody who believes in evolution, anybody who has the idea of evolution, anybody who studies or teach evolution. The first question is, it does not answer the question of time. It tells you somehow, somewhere, an explosion happened. When did it happen? A long time ago. When did it happen? In the beginning of time. When did it happen? See, time has 3 things. It has a past, present, and future. In order for something to happen, it needs to have a time frame. But you realize evolution cannot dictate when the time frame occurs. The second problem that we have with evolution is evolution does not answer the question of space, space. Think about it. If there was nothing that existed, where would nothing take place? So nothing existed, and nothing somehow took place in nothing. Because anything that occurred, it needs to have a place. Par exemple, n'a font croisade dans l'église là, mais croisade là a participé dans l'église là. Which means there's a space where the crusade happens. The third question is, where is the matter? If you have nothing, and there is nothing, how can nothing plus nothing give you everything? Okay, so pardon, we're gonna pass there on Tijan. Sometimes my math could be a little funky. So si m'gen zéro l'église, m'pli slip à zéro. Combien ça bon? C'est ça m'te suspect. Mais comment faire un moun pas gen rien? Parce qu'on connaît pas dit zéro, yo dit rien. Moun n'a pas gen rien. Il pli slip à rien. Et dans rien ça il fin plus pas rien, il vient égal toute bagaille qui existait. So you telling me nothing came together with a whole bunch of other nothings and somehow created trees, grass, life, breath, sun, solar system? Come on now. Listen, I know I was born last or night, but I wasn't born last night. That's tough. No, you can't say nothing creates nothing. Mais seul bagay mwen qui fait ça l'église, seul bagay mwen qui explique tout ça, c'est Genèse 1er verset 1er. It says, in the beginning, you have time. Because I want you to understand when it says in the beginning, raison qui fait le cas dit in the beginning, parce que en 20 ans, t'es gen bon Dieu. Ça veut dire, si bon Dieu était là en 20 ans, l'elle dit dans le commencement, il a dit dans le commencement parce qu'en 20 commencement, il était Dieu. But because not only in the beginning, it tells you that God creates, which shows you an intellectual person who is coming together, or an intellectual entity qui vient ensemble, qui vient puis fait un projet bien déterminé. It tells you God created the heavens, your space. For everything under heaven is the Lord, the Bible says. The Bible lets you know, look up to the hills or look up to the heavens, which means the space is the heavens and the earth, your matter. So in Genesis 1 verse 1, où trouvez space, où trouvez le, où trouvez matter. Trois questions que pas aucun scientist qui a expliqué till this day. Mais ça me met dans l'éternel. Puis montrer limitation à l'homme. Premier bagage il mettait dans la Bible. Puis prouver c'est lui-même qui l'éternel parce qu'il connaît ça pour faire discussion. Mais premier bagage où l'ouvrir Bible is in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Now you got to understand why that means a lot to us, church, because when you understand in the beginning, because right now I'm talking about all the doctrinal stuff, I'm going to give you some gospel right now, and we just going to have a good time with the gospel. When you understand in the beginning, you understand that God was there in the beginning. Et là, on comprend que l'Éternel était là dans le commencement. Ou remarquez, ça veut dire, s'il était là avant l'être commencé, l'être fini, l'Éternel est toujours là. Oh, nous pas comprendre. Et à cause il était là avant création, ça veut dire pas aucun monde qui t'a créé ou bien choisi le but là, mais il était là avant création. Nous pas comprendre. Ça veut dire l'église, à cause pas aucun monde qui t'a créé l'éternel pas un boss. L'éternel font bagaille grand monde. L'éternel font décision si et elle. Tout reste monde gen boss. Même sous temps de Trump, c'est Trump. Mais Trump gon boss y'aurait l'éternel. Parce que avant Trump te gen l'éternel. Avant Biden te gen l'éternel. Avant Obama te gen l'éternel. Avant Putin te gen l'éternel. Because before all this, there was the Lord. Et some remain à l'éternel. Because you didn't elect him to be there. You can't you can't bring him down when he's no longer. Oh, y'all don't get it. Because you didn't choose him, you can't throw him out. Because you didn't elevate him in the beginning, you can't bring him down. Why? Because when you came, l'Éternel était déjà là. But I want you to understand, in the beginning, God created. Ooh. See, at this point, you see the love of God right there. Because God not only created the heaven and the earth, but just the phrase, in the beginning, God. Church, I can sit here by myself and enjoy it by myself. Let that stand you, in the beginning, God. Ça veut dire, avant tout problème, l'Éternel était là. Avant toute difficulté, l'Éternel était là. Avant tout, all the things that's been happening, l'Éternel était là. Et là après ça. Mais ça me même pour connaître. L'elle dit in the beginning God. Avant même arriver dans la création, l'Éternel était déjà Dieu. Ça veut dire, bon Dieu pas de gain puis créé puis tourner bon Dieu. God did not have to create us to be God. God was God by himself. God was God in his own 2 feet. God was God before us, and he'll be God after us. And what I want you to understand is God did not have to create us, but rather he created us from grace. And let us comprendre that God is all-knowing of past, present, and future. God created us in spite of him seeing the mess we're doing today. Which means he could have not created us and he would have been good. Him not creating us would still make him God. He would have not went off parce qu'il t'a toujours été l'Éternel. Mais ça me remet dans l'Éternel. Malgré il était déjà bon Dieu, malgré il connaît Michael Anderson Clark Semistap de faute, il toujours créé nous. Il toujours bonne chance pour nous faire. Il toujours bonne chance pour nous grandir. Et qu'on y a le bonne chance pour nous vivre ensemble pour nous parler avec Jean l'Éternel grand. So the biggest grace in the text in Genesis 1 verse 1, it doesn't only just prove that God created the heaven and the earth. It doesn't only just prove what scientists have been trying to find all along, but rather it proves that in the beginning, God created us out of grace and mercy, where he didn't have to, but he saw it in his compassionate heart, and he imagined you for being you. And he created you out of grace, even before you even had the idea of being conceived. And that's the God we serve, church. He's not only a God with power. He's not only a God with all strength and all might, but rather he's a God of grace and compassion. Que malgré qu'on ait n'a pas le fond paquet erreur, il toujours choisi puis créer nous. Et non seulement il crée nous, mais il crée nous avec un paquet de belles bagailles pour nous apprécier l'Éternel. Par exemple, nous avons belles flèches à yo, malgré c'est nous-mêmes qui pointons nous mettons là. Mais on connaît c'est l'Éternel qui choisit couleur, c'est l'Éternel qui peinture, c'est l'Éternel qui bat bon the good smelling odor that comes from it. You realize God did all those so we can enjoy that today. And none of that took anything away from him being God. But the grace of God is even when he knows we're going to mess up, even when he knows that we're going to fall short, he still took the time to create, because in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Que bon Dieu bénisse nous, que bon Dieu gère nous, and may you guys have a blessed night. Merci.
So this is only the beginning. Comme nous disons en créole, ça c'est trois quêtes là, shy like there. And so we're encouraging you to invite other young people. Jeunes yo capable inviter jeunes, et grand moun yo ka inviter ni jeunes ni grand moun. This is only the beginning. We have a good group here tonight, mais nous connaît capable gen plus monde. N'attend nous demain soir. He's just warming up. He's not even on first gear yet. So keep coming, and the Lord have blessings and stuff for you guys.
We thank Pastor Classimis for being here tonight. Et nous disons merci d'être que nous te prend part à programme na assoya. Pour nous capable mettre en terme, m'a invité pour nous mettre nous debout. Et nous allons chanter ensemble le numéro 43. Premier et dernier couplet. Et ensuite, nous allons prier avec Pasteur Ludi César. Le numéro 43, je veux chanter l'amour puissant.
Que
n'a fait baisser nous, baisser tête nous pour la prière. Éternel, notre Père, notre Dieu, Papa, nous qui dans le ciel là, merci de ce que vous faites nous grâce. Merci de ce que vous créez nous pour gloire, tendre Père. Merci pour le message sauvé pour nous asseoir. Nous demandons, va permettre que foi nous grandisse dans la parole de jour en jour. On va bénir pasteur qui parler dans le nom. Et nous demandons à chaque soir pour vous un message pour qui nous force pour nous capables de persévérer, Seigneur, jusqu'à ce que Jésus tourne. Bénis tout le monde qui t'attend des paroles à soir. Et permettre que chaque soir nous capable là pour entendre des paroles et Seigneur pour accepter pour nous capable de sauver au nom de Jésus-Christ, notre divin sauveur. Maintenant, moment arrivé pour nous capables d'entrer la caille nous. Nous demandons à prendre volant pour nous, à conduire nous, permettre que nous entrions bien et nous passions une nuit en bien sous le regard protecteur. Au nom de Jésus-Christ, notre divin sauveur, nous prions à lui soit toute la gloire et l'honneur au siècle des siècles. Au siècle des siècles. Au siècle des siècles.
Encore nous remercions nous d'être que nous te prenons part à programme Nassoir et nous attendons demain soir à 7h30 pour un programme pareil. Merci et bonne nuit avec Jésus.